Hey, it's Yeems. Today I'm going to talk about my song No Trace and how it's inspired by a lot of elements of experimental music like Musique Concrète and field recordings and room resonances, and also I'm going to talk about some other experimental composers who I really like who inspired the production of my song. So the song was written in a really different way than I write most songs. I was in a house in upstate New York with my friend and we were writing music together, and we got to this point one day where we were just feeling really stuck and we didn't know how to move forward writing together. So we said, let's just take an hour on our own in different rooms of the house with different instruments and just start a completely new idea and see where we go from there. So we set a timer on our phones for an hour, and in that amount of time the song just spilled out. It was really intuitive and kind of stream of consciousness, but I think it really spilled out in such a short period of time because for a long time I had been wanting to write a song called No Trace about my best friend Trace and how we lived together and how he moved out of our shared apartment and I stayed in the shared apartment because I was going to grad school, so I stayed in Boston, and just about how the space just felt completely different once he'd lived there and kind of imbued it with his he's just like such a bright light of a person, and the space felt so empty and almost like haunted when I was there alone without him. So when I knew I wanted to put this song on the album, I didn't know how to produce it because it was not like a normal song. The form is different and the chorus kind of leans like soundscapey and ambient. There's no lyrics and it's this kind of like busy, watery, impressionistic sounding piano part. All I knew is that I wanted the production to sound like what the song was about. So to kind of sound like the memory of a space with someone you love and a space kind of like haunted by the memory of them. And that's when I knew I wanted to lean on some experimental music techniques to produce the song. So the first technique that we use that I think is my favorite is the idea of resonant frequencies and room resonances. Resonant frequencies are really interesting, and there's kind of like a whole world behind resonant frequencies that you can explore, but basically everything that's made of atoms has a resonant frequency, or a frequency that it resonates with the most. You can kind of think about it like if you're like pushing someone on a swing, there's like an exact moment and force that you can push them at that will propel them the most. And it's the same with like sound waves. So when sound waves move in space, a certain sound wave will hit an object at a way that it affects it the most and it vibrates with the most. And it's really interesting actually, like when I was in school, we would be rehearsing in a little studio and I would play like a really loud low note on my cello and suddenly the cabinet would like vibrate and shake, like audibly, you could hear it. It's really cool that you can kind of just incidentally find resonant frequencies of objects like that. And there's also so many different applications of resonant frequencies that are really fascinating. Like for instance, buildings are tuned to make sure that they're not resonant with the frequencies of earthquakes so that they don't like over resonate like a wine glass when an opera singer is singing and shatter or crash when an earthquake happens. Also, bodies have resonant frequencies. Organs have resonant frequencies. I think human body resonant frequencies are like really low. They're like 5 to 10 hertz or something like that. And many people think that when that pitch is played in space around a person, you end up feeling like dizzy or nauseous. Some people think that certain resonant frequencies resonate with parts of the brain and can elevate you to different levels of consciousness. There's like all these different applications of resonant frequencies that are really, really fascinating. And you might be wondering, how do you find a resonant frequency? There's obviously like a mathematical way, but the way that I think is most interesting is a way popularized by a guy named Alvin Lucier, who's a composer, born in 1931. He died in 2021, I think. And he was kind of an experimental music composer. He was mostly concerned with acoustics and frequencies rather than like notes and melodies. He wrote this piece that is his most famous work called I Am Sitting in a Room. And essentially, the whole piece is the process of finding the resonant frequency of a room. Basically what he's doing is he's reading this text that he's written. It goes, I am sitting in a room.
I am sitting in a room.
Different from the one you are in now.
Different from the one you are in.
He records himself saying that text into a microphone.
I am sitting in a room.
And then he has a speaker in the same room and he plays that recording back.
I am sitting in a room.
And then he records that recording of himself talking, and then he plays that back, and then he records that recording and plays that back, and it happens probably like 30 or 40 times, so it's quite a long piece. It's kind of like performance art, but it becomes music because the room itself kind of acts like a filter as the recording is playing through the speakers, The room kind of filters the sound in the sense that certain frequencies resonate with the room more than others, and those frequencies become predominant in the sound recording. As it gets recorded more and more and passed through this filter of the room, the resonant frequencies just get louder and louder and start to completely overtake the sound of his voice and the sound of the text. And by the end of the piece, it's just the sound of the resonant frequency kind of humming about. It sounds really haunted and eerie, and it's so cool because it really kind of changes in many ways the way that we think of music as a whole, because the space literally becomes the primary performer of the piece. It like overtakes him as the performer, which is so mind-blowing. It's rightfully a famous piece. So this kind of felt like the perfect technique to use for the song No Trace, because we wanted it to sound like a space. And we were recording the whole album in this really beautiful home up in Northern California, and it has like a studio space in the house, but it also has this like brilliant big living room with like wooden beams all around, and the room itself just like kind of creaked and moved with the sun and the wind, and it was like not completely quiet. And honestly, in the album you can hear like creaks and sounds of the space, because we literally just recorded it like in a living room. So we recorded the room resonance of this living room. We basically recorded the main piano part that happens in the chorus. It's very like watery and flowy. And then we played that through speakers, then we recorded that, then we played it through the speakers again, recorded that, until we found the room resonance of this like beautiful living room. If you listen closely, I think you can hear it. It's kind of like this weird like over resonant frequency, kind of like a mid-high range like hum in the background of the song. It sounds sort of out of place initially, but I think we then used a bunch of other techniques to kind of frame this as like the main centerpiece of the experimental elements that we were adding to the chorus, to make this section feel very soundscapey and ambient rather than like a pop song. So room resonance was the first experimental music technique that we used when producing this song. The second one is field recordings. Field recording is basically just recording outside of the environment of a studio or a controlled environment, often with portable equipment. The idea of like recording birds or sampling the sound of like the wind rustling tree leaves, that's all field recording. Field recording has been around for a really long time, but it became popular in experimental music during Musique, Concrète, which was basically like a music movement that happened in the 1940s, pioneered by a guy named Pierre Schaeffer in France. And basically the idea is that instead of using the raw materials of notes on an instrument to create music or to compose a piece of music, instead you're using sounds of the world around us, or field recordings. So like the sound of a train, the sound of a car, the sound of wind. Musique Concrète really changed the way that we think of music as a whole. It inspired modern day sound design. It inspired the way we think of like modern day sampling and experimental ambient music and meditative music. It also paved the way for huge experimental music composers who came afterwards, like John Cage or Stockhausen, who no longer were bound to the confines of music being made of notes on an instrument, but rather music can be made of any sound. So again, we really wanted this song to sound like the memory of a place. So we really leaned into the sounds of the space around us. We got a little like attachment mic for an iPhone, and we walked around and recorded the sound of the ocean. We recorded the sound of the stream across the way. We recorded the crickets outside on the deck. We recorded the sound of the birds outside when we were eating lunch. All that kind of stuff really became instrumental in kind of creating the soundscape of this song. We also recorded the sound of my footsteps on the gravel driveway of the house.
Okay, that one was great.
That was a great take.
I think it's really nice because it makes it feel like you're kind of going on a walk with me as you're listening to the song and kind of reminiscing about all these memories with this person. It feels like you're kind of transported. Beyond field recordings, we also actually tried to like imitate the sound of other field recordings that we couldn't get using extended techniques on my cello. An extended technique is basically just playing your instrument in a way you're not normally supposed to play it, which is, I suppose, a lot of what I do, but that's like the technical term for it. So for instance, I really wanted like a whale sound, We're in this house where we're constantly looking at the ocean, and the sound of the room resonance in the middle section of this piece really kind of sounds almost like whale-like. So I wanted to like emphasize that, and obviously we can't field record that. I wish we could, that would be really cool. But I use an extended technique to do that on the cello. I'm gonna actually get my cello and show you how I did that. Okay, I have my cello. So obviously normally when you're playing cello, you play about here to make sound, but you can actually bow on the tailpiece of the cello, and it makes kind of the sound of a whale. We also did other whale sounds using false harmonic slides, so like, sounds really good on the low strings. There were a lot of other extended techniques that we use in this song too. Like for instance, normally when you bow on the cello, you're bowing horizontally back and forth like this. But there's a thing called circular bowing, which is essentially exactly what it sounds like, where you bow in a circle and it kind of sounds like wind. You can also do it on a note. So we did that in this song also because it imitated the sound of wind. Another cool one that we did is, again, this house is made of wooden beams, and constantly the wooden beams were like creaking in the sun. I kind of wanted to add the sound of like wood or like a door creaking, and you can do that if you kind of press on your bow down on the strings. It sounds kind of like a tree creaking. So we use that as well. It's like a whole world of extended techniques on instruments as well. There's a guy, a composer named Helmut Lachenmann, who's a German composer, who I highly recommend listening to. He self-describes his music as Musique concrète instrumentale, so like music concrete but with an instrument. So instead, again, of using notes on an instrument to make melodies, to make music, he's using like sounds on an instrument to make music. There's a piece called Pression specifically, which I think inspired for me a lot of these different extended techniques. This piece is really amazing. It kind of opens you up to all of the possibilities that there are with just a cello and a bow. It also really gives you a lot of respect for contemporary classical performers, especially if you look at the score. Oh my gosh, like, we're trained to look at notation and read music, and that's how you learn to play a piece. But when the raw materials for a piece are no longer notes, someone like Helmut Lachenmann invents like an entire new notation system of like, okay, this marking means to like make a whale sound, and this marking means to make the creaky door sound. And you have to learn that entire notation system before performing the piece. There's also a whole world of different notation systems that have developed as a result of different materials being used as the raw materials for music. So there are like text scores, like John Cage and Pauline Oliveros have amazing text score pieces. And it's amazing because, again, it's expanded the idea of what music is. It doesn't have to be notes on a page. It can be anything really that creates a certain soundscape. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of some different experimental music techniques that I use in producing my song No Trace. I hope this was interesting. Please leave any comments or questions if you have them. I don't have all the answers, but I certainly like to talk about this stuff. So if you like this, maybe I'll make another one of these. And thanks so much for watching. Bye!